Hi, welcome to another edition of the Infernal Brains podcast. I'm Tars Tarkas from tarstarkas.net.
And I'm Todd Statman from Die Danger Die Die Kill, aka 40K.
And as we are the Infernal Brains, we have another brain-centered podcast for you today with everybody's favorite classic Mexican horror film, El Barón del Terror, or as it's more commonly known in the US, The Brainiac.
Yeah, I think this is we can say this is pretty much a canonical psychotronic film, wouldn't you say that,
Yeah,
Tars?
it's one of
It's
the required viewings for anyone who's into monster costumes that are ridiculous or
uh-huh.
classic Mexican horror films. So it
Yeah,
straddles both sides of the fence.
yeah, definitely. I first became aware of this film when I was a kid, and I heard this from other people as well. There was a picture of the Brainiac, of the monster, in an issue of Famous Monsters of Filmland. I remember they used to occasionally run pictures from Mexican horror movies, and I remember looking at that and thinking, whatever the 10-year-old version of what the fuck is, probably what the fuck. And yeah, kind of became obsessed with it from then. Didn't see it for quite a long time, but when I did, it was not disappointing.
Yeah, I've read that story a lot, even though I'm probably too young for that issue to have come out.
Right.
The film is famous enough that I heard about it before I saw it,
Yeah.
and it was I guess the American dub version was in enough video shops that I saw it a long, long time ago,
Right.
and then didn't see it again until recently, where I saw both Riff Tracks version of it and then the Mexican or the Spanish language version with the restored DVD, which I think came out in 2006 or 2007.
Right. Oh, was that with the Casa Negra version?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, we should mention too that this was not planned, but just the way that things sort of shook out for this episode is that Nick comes to this episode having watched only El Barón del Terror, the original Spanish language version of the film, but not Brainiac. And then
hmm
myself, because all I had access to was the Brainiac, I've watched the Brainiac. So so we're probably going to be filling each other in and discovering in the course of our journey today what the differences between the two is. I mean, the Brainiac, El Barón del Terror, sorry, is one of a handful of films that K. Gordon Murray purchased. He brought a number of Mexican films. Some of those were those atrocious kiddie films like the Little Red Riding Hood movies and Santa Claus, and
Yeah.
those were part of his famous kiddie matinee package, because he was known as the king of the kiddie matinees. And then others, some of the horror films, a couple Santo movies, he bought and repackaged for American television and dubbed them. I think, isn't that right, Tars? Or were those theatrical releases too?
I think he had both. He had like kits for the theaters, and they had to follow the specific marketing
Mm,
stuff for the theaters, and then he also had the television kits for the TVs too. And
okay.
in general, they were really successful with the way he was marketing them.
Hmm.
There's even, okay, I've heard this, I don't know if it's true. I heard there was a cult in New York that worshiped K. Gordon Murray as
Uh-huh.
like a demon or something, and
Oh.
it freaked out enough for the local shop owners there that they wouldn't sell the K. Gordon Murray merchandise or get rid of it. I don't know if this is true. It's
Yeah,
just,
is
yeah.
this for real?
Yeah, it sounds like one of those crazy things, but then, we've had enough weird stuff happen in reality that,
Right, that's true. That's
you know,
true. People kind of bag on K. Gordon Murray and his treatment of these movies, but I mean, one thing you can say about him is it's probably due to his efforts more than anyone else's that anyone in the United States knows about Santo, because two of the films he brought over and dubbed were two of the best early Santo films. He brought over Santo versus the Vampire Women and Santo and the Wax Museum.
yeah.
Though he did rechristen Santo Samson for some reason, because
hmm
that's not confusing at all. But
Yeah.
and I
Well,
think he left him pretty untouched. But I mean, he's pretty notorious for the quality of his dubbing. The dubbing tends to be pretty flat in
yeah, they
those.
were all done by the same husband and wife and their 5 or 6 other people team that did all of them.
Uh-huh.
So it's all the same voices in almost all the K. Gordon Murray films.
Right.
So it's sort of, like familiar, but it's also sort of, it's like when we watch all those dubbed kung fu movies and they all have the
Mhm.
same 5 or 6 people and you just recognize
Right.
the same voices.
Right. The guy who does the English accent and
Yeah.
right. Right. It is, yeah, it is like that. And so El Baron del Terror, aka the Brainiac, is part of that package. So, if you're of a certain age, you may have seen it on Saturday afternoon TV back in the day in the 60s or 70s.
I guess after K. Gordon Murray died, a lot of his films were in a bunch of limbo because there's a bunch of copyright issues, and so that may be why the El Negro DVD is El Baron de Terror print instead of the Brainiac print.
Hmm.
But I think they have the audio, which they might have gotten from the actual audio company and not the K. Gordon Murray estate. But I really don't know.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if Brainiac is officially in the public domain, but I know that the copy I own is like a public domain, like a dollar DV. I think I got it at Walgreens or something like that. And I know that the 2 Samson movies he did were also available on public domain discs for a long time, but maybe that they kind of fell through the cracks because I haven't seen them available for a while.
Yeah, it might be like the Gamera films that were public domain, even though they're not really.
Right.
Yeah, who knows? We're not lawyers
No,
anymore.
exactly. Yes.
We
Yeah,
got
let's make that clear.
yeah, we were
But we
disbarred.
but we may go in the bootleg DVD market, so it's important to know these distinctions. It's like
Yeah,
we might try and put out a whole slew of Gamera videos on the DVDs on the market, for a week and see what we can do with it. So anyway, what to say about Brainiac El Baron del Terror? One of the things I did notice, you had mentioned that you thought maybe the soundtrack was different on the K. Gordon Murray version, but it does, in the opening credits to Brainiac, it does credit Gustavo Carrion, who did the score to the original version. Now, whether it's an edited version of the score and whether it's used in the same way is would have to be judged by someone who had seen both movies, which is neither of us. So that's
yeah.
the best I can do.
And even then, I probably wouldn't be listening as distinctly to the soundtrack or not, unless it was something like they do occasionally where they'll have dramatic music at an actual time where you notice it, but other times it'll just fade to the background while I'm busy watching blinking lights and the main characters' faces. So.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I did notice there was one little comedy cue when the goofy sort of comic relief detective said something dumb and it went wop 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 like that. that was the only time it really grabbed me.
Yeah. There's also at least one part where in the English soundtrack where it's not dubbed into English and it's still in Spanish, which
yeah.
I think I remember reading is actually in the other the Brainiac version, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder because it looks there. It's pretty. I mean, for a movie, this is a movie from '62. It's not super gory, but it's still pretty intense. It's kind of gross more than it's
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, and I can't imagine them having cut that much from the American version, given what you see in it, what you do see. So maybe we should talk about some of the personnel involved in this movie. The movie stars and is produced by Abel Salazar, who was an actor. He started acting in the early 40s, but he also started producing pretty soon after that. And in about 57, he formed a production company called ABSA, which I guess is a contraction of Abel Salazar. And he started producing genre films, and he did a lot of horror films. He did a film called El Vampiro, which is said to have kicked off the Mexican horror boom. And also was the film that typecast German Robles forever in the role of a vampire. And he's actually in Brainiac as well, though in a supporting role.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It seems like he probably had some love for horror films, Salazar, but it sounds like it was a lot of his motivation was financial because he was inspired by the Universal horror films, and
Hmm.
those had made a lot of money for Universal. So he thought that would be a good way to go, and apparently he was right because the films did pretty well.
Yeah, and actually his brother is Alfredo Salazar, who wrote like a huge ton of the notable Mexican genre films, including the Aztec Mummy trilogies, the Doctor Doom, the Batwoman film, a bunch of the Santo films, Curse of the Doll People.
Uh huh.
It's just like too many to list, and like
Right.
yeah, and so
Yeah.
even like with Salazar following the Universal mold and his brother doing the more I guess the more lower rent stuff.
Right.
Like between them, they like help had their fingerprints all over Mexican cinema for
Yeah.
40 years.
Yeah. This film actually has a lot of those too many credits to mention people involved.
Yeah,
The story is by Federico Curiel, who was also a director, and he
he,
directed a lot of Sano movies.
yeah. He was a musician too, and he scored a lot of
Oh wow,
films. And he I think
businessman.
yeah, and he plays the sidekick detective in here who reminded me of like Phil Silvers or something.
Yeah, me too. He was sort of the he wasn't like a he was sort of goofy, but he did look like Phil Silvers. He wasn't as a sort of a comic relief sidekick. He wasn't as bad. He was low key enough not to be irritating. He wasn't like Tin Tan or one of those
Yeah,
guys. He was bearable, but I didn't know that until you just told me that was him. So, and
yeah,
he's one of there's another director cameo in the movie too, playing one of the Brainiac's victims is Rene Cardona, which I guess I should say Rene Cardona Senior,
yeah.
since
He has his whole legacy.
right, exactly. And it gets confusing because both Rene Cardona Jr. and Rene Cardona Sr. were directing films at the same time, and I think there were films that they even worked on together. But
Hmm.
but Senior directed Night of the Bloody Apes and Santa Claus and a lot of Santo movies, uh,
Yeah.
just like Curiel did.
Hmm.
Oh, and he also, I should point out, he does. There's a scene, there's a scene where Rene Cardona is supposed to be frozen, like paralyzed by the villain, and he looks like he's trying very hard not to laugh, especially once the monster shows up.
Yeah, a lot of the Baron when he hypnotizes people, and so they have to freeze, and they can only act with their eyes. So we got a lot of the characters have big wide eyes, and they're looking
Yes.
around with their eyes. Well, they have to freeze the rest of their face, and it just sort of looks pretty ridiculous. But
I think German Robles does even a more ridiculous job. He looks like his eyes are about to pop out of his head, and well, also these guys are being forced, basically, to paralyzed and forced to watch as the Brainiac has its way with their wives and daughters,
hmm.
which is sort of like the way the Brainiac rolls, which we'll get into
Yeah.
uh, eventually, definitely. Uh,
Yeah.
and also as a director, we've got Chano Urueta. I really like his movies. He did most of the early Blue Demon movies that Blue
Hmm.
Demon did for Vergara. I didn't know a lot about him, couldn't find a lot of information on him, but what I could find shows that he had a pretty illustrious career. He
Hmm.
was involved in revolutionary politics when he was a teenager, and he joined with Zapata and Pancho Villa as a filmmaker. He worked in Hollywood during the silent era. He was an assistant director to Eisenstein. And then in the 50s, 40s, 50s, he started just making a lot of genre pictures in the Mexican film industry and cranked out quite a lot. He made a film called The Magnificent Beast or La Bestia Magnifica, which had Wolf Ruvinskis, who played Neutron, which was considered one of the earliest wrestling films. So I guess sort of a progenitor of the lucha libre genre. But the one thing that struck me, I mean, obviously the guy had a pretty amazing career and was a very seasoned filmmaker. And the thing that I always like about his lucha films and his horror films is that they're weird. I mean, the Brainiac is weird, uh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's sort of reading all this, it occurred to me that maybe he was just, it's not so much that he was weird, maybe he was just bored. You know, maybe he was just trying to spice these movies up, kind of like Seijun Suzuki did at Nikatsu, where he was bored with these gangster scripts, so he would just do all these weird stylistic things to make them more interesting for him.
Yeah, maybe. So,
Or maybe not.
yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can't ask him. So.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing his name correctly, so I'd be kind of ashamed anyway. So.
Yeah. As everyone expects, El Baron del Terror opens with the Spanish Inquisition, and the evil Baron is being brought before a bunch of masked people, and they read off his crimes.
I was just going to say that the beginning of the movie really reminds me of Mario Bava's Black Sunday, the way that begins with, the same thing. It starts in the 17th century and sentences being pronounced on the witch in this case, so it's very, very similar.
Yeah, Bloody Pit of Horror also has the same opening with the Inquisition and the guy getting his crimes named.
Right.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah, and then getting put in his own torture device,
Yeah.
like Barbara. Yeah, he gets put in a Iron Maiden. Barbara Steele gets a spike mask hammered onto her face, and the Baron gets burnt. But one thing I wanted to check with you is I wanted to. I wrote down all the charges that were read against the Baron, and maybe I could read those, and you can tell me if they fit with the subtitled version, because it's quite a list. I mean, they really, they weren't worried about putting too fine a point on it.
Mm-hmm.
The charges against him, and you also have to understand the version I watched, that it's the K. Gordon Murray version, so it's the dub version, so it's read as if by a hypnotized person reading the table of elements. It's just like very flat. So but the charges are for heresy and the instigation of heresy, for practicing dogmatism, for having used witchcraft, superstitions, and conjurations for depraved and dishonest ends, for having employed the art of necromancy, invoking the dead, trying to foretell the future through the use of corpses, which is interesting. And then buried way at the end is for having seduced married women and maidens.
Yeah, and that's where he cracks up when that one's read. Because
Yeah,
he's grinning like on and off throughout, but that's the one where he bursts out laughing.
He's like, "Oh, you people!" But yeah, and I do think that that's probably, they buried that at the end. But I do think that that's what the people are. I think that's what he's really being punished for. Because also, you hear some chatter from the rabble, and the women in the audience they're sounding like they're going to kind of miss having the Baron around, because I think the Baron has some kind of sex mojo going on.
The scene where he's being burned, and then there's just townspeople that are commenting on it all goofily, that it doesn't fit at all with what's supposedly a serious moment where the guy's getting burned to death, and like
they're kind of gossiping, and it's pretty silly.
Takes the emphasis out of all the religious Catholicism dogma stuff.
Well, you know what else takes the edge off that is that the fact that they dress the Baron up as the Pope.
Yeah.
Because they say it's like some kind of, it's part of the ritual, it's like the garment of shame to sort of subject him to ridicule. But then when they come to the scene where he's being burnt, he's wearing like the mitre and like the robes. He's dressed like, a bishop or the Pope. So what that is meant to imply, well, draw your own conclusions. But I thought that was sort of an interesting little touch.
Yeah, and then he's just casually whatever. You see that comet? I'll be back when it's back, and then
he's like, bring it on. That's his whole attitude during the thing. And then he calls out the executioners, even though they're all hooded. He knows who they are, and he names them one by one. And then he says he'll return in 300 years when the comet passing overhead returns, and then he'll have his revenge on all of their descendants, that he'll basically wipe out their entire lineage, and then I guess he disappears, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think they blur it somewhat with the flames, so I'm not sure if
Right.
how if he just vanishes or if they just makes the
Right.
flames go big, the cover is vanishing. But
Unclear.
yeah, and then the times jump forward 300 years.
To 1961.
Yeah.
Bow, 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 bow. Sorry.
Yeah,
There should have been some go-go music at that point. I guess it was a little too early.
yeah, and so it's just like non-exciting, not really rock and roll playing when they jump to modern days at a dance place. So
That's right. Now, and what's going on with this guy? Because the first guy we see in 1961 is this guy who's played by Ruben Rojo, whose name in the Spanish version is Reynaldo and
hmm
Ronnie in the in the English version,
hmm
but he shows up in the sequence in the 1600s as a character named Marcos Miranda, who
hmm
is he acts as a character witness for the Baron. He like actually comes to testify to his defense,
yeah,
and they just throw him there. The hooded guy is just. I think they throw him in jail for heresy or something.
yeah. They give him a bunch of lashes. That's what they
Oh,
sentence him
okay,
for
right,
lying, even though
right,
you know he
because
may
they
think
decided he was lying.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's just like the Baron's a good guy, and then like you're a liar. Whip him.
Right. But what's the deal with that guy? Why was that guy, because it's one of those movies where 300 years later, there's all the descendants.
hmm
And of course, they're played by the same actors because everyone knows that, all through
hmm
all through every generation, people of the same, of the same lineage look exactly the same.
Yeah.
So we have this guy who isn't even it's never even mentioned that in the version I watch, it's never even mentioned that he's a descendant. It's just like he's an identical guy. Is there anything explaining the purpose of that, him being in the prologue in the version you watched?
No, there's only a throwaway sentence at the end where he's defending his girlfriend, who's also a descendant, and the Baron tells him, "Get out of the way because your ancestor defended me.
Okay.
Don't make me forget it." And so,
Wow, that's quite a payoff.
yeah.
It's
So, yeah, it's one of the things that doesn't seem to make any sense at all. But I
yeah,
guess to show that the Baron is doing this for a purpose and not just to kill random
right.
people, which
The-
doesn't jive with him killing all the random women. But
Right. Yeah. He's like right out of the gate he starts killing people. But yeah, that's like supposed to show that he's principled, I guess. But then
yeah.
right, Ronnie's girlfriend is a descendant of one of the executioners, so she's on his hit list of people to do the Brainiac thing on.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to deal with the Brainiac at some point. We're gonna have to lay it out as far as the Brainiac's concerned, because first thing we see in 1961 is that we were introduced to Ronnie and Vicky, and they're both conveniently astronomers, and they're eagerly awaiting the arrival of this comet,
hmm
and which ends up looking like I don't know, like a mountain from an HO train set being dropped into the middle of a set or something like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird.
It's like an elevator or something that just
Right.
lands.
Yeah, it makes a very gentle landing on Earth. And at which point the Baron steps out, but he's in his Brainiac guise. And this is
Mhm.
the first time we ever see him. And the thing I'll just say about the costume without describing it is that this is a low budget movie, definitely. It's obviously all filmed indoors. All of the exterior scenes are shot in front of these photographic backdrops that it
Yeah.
looks like the actors are about to walk into them. So, a lot of cheesy movies, especially really notorious ones, and the monsters are kind of weird. A lot of times you can blame it on just the monsters being cheap and them just kind of throwing it together like Robot Monster. They just put a diving helmet on top of a gorilla suit. But
Mhm.
the Brainiac, there it seems like it's pretty involved, right? It seems like a lot of weird thought went into it.
Yeah. I think it's sort of based on some demon, like
Mm,
older demon images, but it's not not exact, and then like they I guess they made the mask a little too complex for the technology, and
Right.
so it comes off not looking as good.
It has a right. He has an oversized head. It's almost like a Mardi Gras mask or something.
Yeah,
But there's a, and it's, it's pretty fixed. Like it doesn't have a lot of mobility. The mouth is just kind of frozen open. It has these big fangs, and he has like a big old nose, like a big
hmm
old pointy nose and pointy ears.
yeah,
But then there's like a bladder inside the mask that
yeah. I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be breathing like that or if it was just the actor when he breathes in and out. It
oh you
inflated and deflated the mask. So,
well, because it inflates and deflates the top, though. It's not
yeah,
like around his mouth. It's like the top of the head is kind of pulsating, but in this weird, it's not real impressive. It's kind of funny because the head kind of caves in on the
mhm,
inhale. It's definitely a weird effect.
yeah. Maybe it's deflating because he needs to be filled up with brains. So,
Right. Yeah, I mean, I thought it had something to do with the whole brain focus, and then it has this long serpentine forked tongue
mm,
that protrudes out of the mouth, which is super grotesque. I mean, there's like a not subtle at all sexual undercurrent that runs pretty much through this entire film. I think
yeah,
part is the Baron's invasive tongue, and then he has sort of like lobster hands.
yeah. The like tentacle lobster hands or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Yeah,
And he just shows up like this is another thing that's interesting is he just you don't see any reference to the Baron having this brainiac being the brainiac in the early part. It's just he when he comes out of the comet, he's in this guise, and it's not like he transforms back and forth. It's sort of like a Jekyll and Hyde thing.
hmm
And Tars, the thing I wanted to ask you is like, what do you think the deal with that is? Do you think that the Baron was always the brainiac, and we just didn't learn about it in the prologue?
I think so because later in the film he says when he's reading about his own execution, he said that he had no ancestors. He just was the Baron.
Okay.
And that makes me think that he was just a demon and then he just took human form at that point in
Okay.
in Mexican history to cause a lot of trouble.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I wasn't. I mean, I thought that might be the case, but it wasn't explicit. I guess it's.
Yeah, they don't explain a lot. They just run forward.
I guess that's good because it makes us work along with the
Yeah.
movie, and it engages us further in the story.
Yeah. Well, the backstory of the Brainiac is so well known, they don't need to explain
Right.
it.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
just because it's because we're gringos and we just don't get it.
It's, what's sort of interesting is when he comes out all disheveled, because his clothes are all tore up too, which
Right.
I guess if you're living in a comet for 300 years, you've got to have some hobby, which is ripping your clothes.
Right.
The first person he kills is played by Victor Velasquez, who's the father of Lorena Velasquez,
Oh
who's
wow. Okay.
in all those wrestling women movies.
Right.
And like he kills him, and then luckily his clothes fit, so he transports his clothes. So now he's all dressed in a nice suit.
Right, yeah, and the clothes just disappear from the victim,
Yeah,
leaving him with his wife beater and boxers on,
yeah,
and they appear on Abel Salazar,
mhm,
and which I guess means that Abel Salazar is going commando since he didn't take the guy's drawers with him, but
yeah. Well, he is
and
the
then
hedonist, so
right, exactly, because yes, exactly, he needs to be able to just whip off. He probably has like one of those zipper suits where he can just whip the whole thing off in one arm movement. Yeah, and then he dons the suit and he becomes the suave and sophisticated Baron once again. It was interesting you're talking about that actor being the father of Lorena Velasquez because the next person that he kills is in a bar and it's like a bar girl.
hmm
And she's played by Ariadne Welter, who actually replaced Lorena Velasquez in the fourth Los Luchadores movie, The Panther Women, and was reportedly not very pleased with being in those movies because she said some not very nice things about them. I think she said something like if it would be possible to launch every copy into the sun, she would be none too happy or something along those lines. But so basically, it adds another level of enjoyment to the Brainiac that you could play 6 Degrees of Lorena Velasquez with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of weird how the Baron is supposed to be all suave, and most of his suaveness is just staring at the various people or women, and while they just go on and talk. And so his charisma seems to be more implied than actually there.
Well, no, his charisma is represented by a flashlight flash in his face. When he stares at them, you see, or a pin spot that goes on and off.
Mm-hmm.
But it works on the women. They seem to find him alluring at first until he changes, like most men.
Yeah.
Once they're interested, he turns into a beast, and then he sucks their brains out.
Yeah.
His tongue.
Yeah. Another thing he does is he seems to show up in places right when they're closing, because he shows up at the bar when it's closing, and then he goes to a research place, and that's when they're closing too.
Right.
So the Baron doesn't live by your open hour rules.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
He's that guy who shows up at the mall just as the guy's about to lock the door. Wait, I know exactly what I want. Come on, let me in,
Yeah, I'm the Baron. Flash, flash, flash.
He doesn't seem to. Well, his sort of hypno charisma. It's with women, it seems to draw them in. But with men, I mean, and he does suck the brains of men too, but he's definitely less interested in the men. So what he does on a couple occasions is he hypnotizes the man, and the man becomes frozen, like we were talking about earlier, and then he'll have his way with. In the first case, I think it's German Robles, and it's his wife, and he kills his wife, sucks his wife's brains out in front of him while he's standing there with his eyes goggling out of his head. And then he makes really short work of German's character because he's not into that. And then he does the same thing with the daughter of the character played by Renee Cardona. He's sort of...
yeah, I think he got him flipped.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, Herman Robles is the translator of the daughter, and Renee Cardona is the steel guy.
Oh, okay. All right.
Who jumps into the fire himself after being hypnotized in what I guess is supposed to be the ironic switch of how they condemned the Baron to be burned to death. Right. Although when he killed Herman Robles' character, he strangled him and then set him on fire after they were already dead. So
that's right.
It's not really ironic because it's doesn't fit right. And then the third lady, I don't think they burn her at all. So
yeah, I don't know.
He gives up on the ironic fire.
He was all out irony. Well, they only killed him so many ways. I mean, I guess they did torture him, and then the torture did nothing, which is why they burned him, is what they said at the beginning, because he just enjoyed the torture because he's such a badass. But okay, so it was the daughter of the Herman Robles character. Yeah. Who was really hot, by the way, I must say. And she was like she was really into the Baron until he turned into the monster.
I don't have her name written down, but she was in a bunch of stuff too. So pretty much everybody in this film was in a bunch of stuff, and a lot of them also had other things, but
yeah. I think that Salazar had a stock company of actors that he worked with ABSA, and I think Robles was one. I think Ariadne Welter was one. And I know he worked with Renee Cardona a lot too. I don't know if Renee Cardona actually appeared in a lot of his films, but he did have certain people that he worked with again and again.
Yeah. So let's see. The characters we haven't spoken that much about is there's a bald detective who goes along with the Federico Curiel character, who's sort of following the murders, and he's played by David Silva, who is another familiar name from all the Mexican genre films. He was he played like Thug characters, or
Hmm.
the Hurricane Ramirez films, and he was in the Batwoman film and a bunch of other stuff I didn't write down because of
Yeah.
limited space. But
Right. Yeah. If we really got into listing, I mean, it's
mhm,
that kind of a movie where
yeah,
it's just sort of a who's who of Mexican genre movies of the 60s, and everybody who worked in that industry, I think you couldn't not be prolific. If you made one movie, you made like 100,
yeah,
so all these people were in a whole bunch of them. Yeah, and there's also a lot of characters in this movie. That it was actually for a film that has a pretty simple concept, that guy comes back from the past to get revenge against his killers. We've got the two, Ronaldo and Vicky, who are the two astronomers who are sort of
hmm
on the case trying to figure out what's going on. Then you have the two cops, and then you have their boss at the observatory, and then
hmm
there's all the various descendants of the executioners. I mean, there's a lot of people to keep track of in the movie.
yeah. And some of them, like the boss at the astronomy place, he doesn't really do anything except be the guy who knows about the comet and then gets all worried
Right.
when it disappears. But
Right.
besides that, he doesn't factor in at all.
Yeah, he's just kind of an exposition machine. He shows up to spout pseudo science or pseudo astronomy to explain about the comet. You're right.
I guess we couldn't accept that Ruben Rojo was old enough to be a distinguished astronomer, so the guy who's like 5 years older than him had to play those.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Well, just like Herman Robles is playing. Obviously, he's supposed to be playing a man in his 50s, but
yeah,
I don't think he's that much older than the woman playing his daughter.
yeah. But he does have the exact same mustache that his ancestor had, so.
Oh, yeah. So that's how you know. Yeah, they handed the mustache down from generation to generation.
Yeah,
The other thing that must be noted about the Brainiac and Brainiac slash Baron is that for sustenance, he keeps a chalice filled
yeah,
with brains
yeah.
hidden in his desk.
hmm
That on occasion we're shown him sort of furtively going to his desk and taking a spoonful of brains and eating it like it's Activia or something like that. And I like that because it's sort of presented like the Baron is like a shame eater, like the person who has like a drawer full of pudding in their desk that they kind of
hmm
secretly take a little. So this happens on more than one occasion, and it's a nice gross effect. It's
Yeah.
obviously some sheep brains in this chalice, and then when he eats it, it's like it's really gooey, and
hmm
I like that about this movie. It goes more for the gross out effects than the horror effects, definitely.
Yeah, and it's funny because that seems to be in the room that everyone's at, and like
Yeah.
he goes off to the room when nobody's looking, and it keeps looking back and grabbing stuff out, and it's like,
Yeah.
you think he'd keep it, in a separate room, but
Right. I was waiting for that scene when it was like, Baron, what are you doing? Oh, nothing. And
yeah,
then he puts it in a chest,
yeah,
but
in
it's in,
in the same room.
and
Yeah,
then at the end, I think Ronaldo breaks in, and that's when he finds the chalice of half-eaten brains is when
yeah,
he starts getting the idea that things are not right with the Baron.
yeah. One thing though, because he's implied to, he punctures the back of the people's heads and sucks out the brains, but the
Right.
brains in the chalice are full brains. So
Right.
he's either getting brains from somewhere else that we're not seeing, or he swallows them out as goo and then regurgitates them in whole as brains into the chalice to save for later.
If that's the case, I'd like to think that it was only due to budgetary considerations that they actually didn't show that happening, because
Yeah.
that would have been pretty cool. But yeah, I was wondering about that too, because yeah, if you're sucking brains out through these the little forked ends of the tongue, yeah, it's not going to look the way those did, definitely. So I don't know
Yeah.
what that was about. Or maybe he brought those from home. Maybe maybe he had those in a cooler in the Comet
Yeah.
with him and brought them,
hmm
because he was in there for 300 years, so
Yeah.
must have had quite a stockpile. He must have, a storm shelter's worth of brains
hmm
in that Comet.
Yeah. Luckily, he came back before TV rotted everyone's brains throughout the world.
Right,
So
exactly.
yeah.
So they were still good quality
Yeah.
brains.
Yeah. Now he'd starve to death. So.
Right. But those brains were raised on the classics.
Yeah.
I don't really know what else to say about
Uh,
Brainiac. I mean, I definitely enjoyed
yeah.
watching
One
it.
thing I thought was interesting was Brainiac also had a stock butler character
Oh
who
yeah,
who was in the castle who they never explained where he came from. And then the Federico Curiel cop character was always suspicious of the butler during the party scene and kept staring at the butler.
that's
And you
right.
see the butler like block the exit of the main lady when the Baron's attacking her, so the butler's evil. And then
Right.
yeah, and then when the cops rush in with their flamethrowers, the Federico Curiel like smacks the butler with the flamethrower.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, the butler. I forgot all about the
yeah.
butler, and I
So
just watched this movie for like the fifth time yesterday.
yeah,
The
though they
poor
keep
unsung butler.
yeah, though they keep the comic relief up with I guess Federico Curiel because when they're roasting the Baron, oh spoilers by the way, but when they're roasting
Right,
the
yeah.
Baron, he never gets his flamethrower going. So
Oh.
it's only the other cop.
Wink, yeah.
Yep.
I thought you were gonna. Yeah, they should have had him like getting out a marshmallow and putting it on a stick or something stupid like that.
Yeah.
But about them also, I mean, since we're gonna spoil the ending,
Yeah.
about them using flamethrowers to kill the Baron at the end, as if that worked the first time. Like,
Yeah.
that was another obviously they weren't this was not a documentary. Obviously this was not they weren't really putting a lot of thought into logic when they made this, which is fine because they made a movie with a monster with a pulsating head and a giant tongue that sucks women's brains out.
Yeah, I showed the ending to my wife, and she was shocked that that's how it ended, and also that they burned the monster body, and then it turned into the fully formed human form.
That's right.
Then it turned into the bones that were also burned again. So
Right.
yeah,
And then it turned into a treasure in gold, and then it turned into a frog smoking a cigarette.
yeah,
Okay, none of that is true.
yeah. But it's weird how like as with the Catholicism influence, instead of being burned by the holy fire, he was killed by the fire of modern technology. So
Right, exactly.
it sort of means something if the rest of the film meant anything, but not really because it doesn't. So
Right.
yes, read into it what you will.
Right. Yeah, and I definitely think he was like supposed to be being punished for being such a Lothario, for being such a sex machine, because he was like so brazen that he would even have the men's women right in front of them and they'd be powerless to do anything. So of course he had to be killed.
Yep.
He was like the mystery, the pickup artist of the 17th century.
Yeah. So they dropped the ultimate negs on him with the flamethrower.
Here's a neg for you.
Yeah.
This is a very entertaining movie, definitely.
Yeah, it's
not
like,
good, but entertaining.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, you need to seek it out immediately.
Yeah.
It comes up all the time when people list out their favorite campy stuff and even like their favorite not campy stuff because it's just as solidly entertaining.
Definitely.
Yeah. Because
fast paced,
doesn't waste your time. It's got enough ridiculous stuff with enough serious stuff that it could come off anyway.
Right. And like most Mexican genre movies from this period, it's cheap, but it's well made. I mean, it looks good. I mean, and Chana Ureta definitely knew how to set up a camera and set a scene and light a scene. There's some nice sort of atmospheric, nice black and white photography. So it's nice looking, always a slick product from the Mexican film industry of this era.
So we recommend it.
We do recommend it. Yeah, if you haven't seen it already, but probably most of you already have seen it.
So that's it for El Baron del Terror or the Brainiac. So until next time and next world genre, this is the Infernal Brains checking out.
See ya.